Two experiences that shaped my understanding of how we conduct a stewardship campaign came early in my ministry. One was a revival I was asked to speak at. I was asked to do the closing comments, and it took forever to get to the closing comments because apparently not enough folks had come forward during the revival. So they just kept singing the last song over and over and over until finally someone out of desperation came up just to end it. The other was a church service I attended where the elders apparently decided the offering was not big enough that week. So they took 3. There was one early in the service that apparently didn't add up to be enough, because after the sermon they passed the baskets again. And apparently that wasn't enough, because before the benediction, those baskets were back out in the pews again, trying to get whatever it was they thought they needed to have offered that day. So in the spirit of those 2 experiences, we're doing neither. Instead, I wanted to share with you this story that Cameron Trimble shared with me. And when I heard her sharing it, I thought it fit perfectly with our theme today, which is fearless living. It's titled The Carpenter and the Unbuilder. Once upon a time, there was a man living in a certain kingdom who received an invitation from his king to come to dinner. Something inside him was excited as never before by the invitation. Something was afraid as well. Would he have the right clothes to wear? Would his manners be good enough for his Lord's table? What would they talk about when they were not eating? And above all, the man was frightened by the long journey to the king's castle. So what did the man do? He spent 1 month deciding what to wear and buying the clothes that he did not already have. He spent 2 months learning the rules of etiquette and practicing them at his table. He spent 3 months reading up on all the latest issues so that he would have something to say at the table. Finally, he faced the journey itself. By trade, the man was a carpenter. He had built small houses, extra outhouses, garages, and built them better than anyone else. After he had packed all the clothing and food that he thought he would need, he packed a few tools, just enough to permit him to build some suitable shelter at night. The first day, he traveled through the morning and into the early afternoon, stopping only to eat lunch, and then set about constructing a rough shelter to spend the night. After a few hours of labor, he had a small, safe, dry place to sleep. The next morning, as he was about to start out again, he looked at the shelter he had built, and he noticed some places where he could improve it. Well, one thing led to another, which led to a garage, which led to a kitchen, which led to indoor plumbing. Soon he had pretty much forgotten about the journey and the invitation. Meanwhile, the king was beginning to wonder about the man, and so, as kings are able to do, he arranged for another person to go and travel and to see how the man was coming along. When the king's friend found the carpenter, he was living in his second house because he had sold the first house for a profit and used the money to build an even larger house just down the road. The carpenter was only too happy to invite the visitor to lunch, but while he was content to accept the food, the visitor preferred to eat outside in the yard under a tree. "Is there a reason you don't want to come inside?" asked the carpenter, immediately wondering if his house was not quite right. "Why, yes," replied the visitor. "You see, I am on a journey to have dinner with the king of our land. It is important for me to stay on the journey. Perhaps after lunch you would like to come with me." "What you say sounds very familiar to me," says the carpenter. "I think I too received an invitation, but I've been a little uncertain of the way." "I know," responded the stranger. "I once was uncertain as well. As a matter of fact, once I was a carpenter just like you. I too wanted to build safe places along the way to stay. One day another person on the journey helped me to learn how to unbuild instead of how to build. He helped me to leave the house I was living in and trust the journey itself. I was worried about following the right path. He told me there were a number of paths that would lead to dinner. The king had set it up that way. The king had set it up so that there would be multiple paths and also put warnings on the wrong paths. The important thing was simply to continue to put one foot in front of the other in love and trust. I was also worried about what I left behind. To this, he and the king had seen to it that everything worth saving would be at the castle waiting for me. What you say is certainly a comfort, said the carpenter. It helps to know that you've been just like me. Well then, why don't we let go of this house and get on the journey? I don't know, said the carpenter. Maybe I should sleep on it. May I fix a bed for you, said the carpenter to the visitor. But the visitor countered, no, I will just stay out here under the tree. It's easier to notice the wonderful things that God has put along the way when you're not looking out from inside something that you built to protect you. The unbuilder waited outside all night. The next morning, the carpenter indeed had decided to resume the journey, and together they prepared to set out. Well, said the carpenter, which way shall we go? Which way seems right to you? Replied the unbuilder. I'm not sure. The unbuilder said, I tell you what, let's just sit here a few minutes and think let's think hard about the king and remember the stories that you have been told about him. Remember how much you love him. Remember how much he loves you. And when you have remembered as clearly as you think you can, consider the paths that lie before you and see which one seems to satisfy your longing and remembering of the king. Let your desire to be with the king become more powerful in you than your uncertainty and fear about choosing the right or wrong path. Silently they sat through the morning in the carpenter's front yard. Slowly it began to seem as though they were already on the journey. As the feeling grew and grew, it suddenly didn't seem like any decision needed to be made. It just happened. With a deep sense of freedom, they were off. Many of the days were just like that. New steps out of silent beginnings and pure desires. They simply waited until the sense of journeying wrapped itself around even their waiting. And then they were off without worrying whether they were on the right path or not. In the stillness of their hearts, they made room for the paths, and the path seemed to come to them. Of course, the carpenter still felt the need to build a home from time to time, and the unbuilder made certain that he understood what he was doing, and then let the carpenter do it if he really wanted to. And while the carpenter labored, the builder, his guide and friend, would continue the silent wait in the yard under the tree. And soon they would unbuild yet another house and continue on the journey. In the meantime, the king kept the food warm, which he was very good at doing. Our journey of faith, whether it's a pledge campaign or a family relationship, is so fraught with fear and doubt. So many things tempt us to want to build shelter, to protect ourselves from the dangers that are out there. But the journey is so much more rewarding if we step out. We've been blessed with hopes and dreams. God fills our minds and our souls with so much wondering and imagination about what's out there. For our children, for our loved ones, our neighbors, the hopes and dreams we share are right out there on the horizon, where they will stay, unless we take that first step out of the yard. Thankfully, we don't travel alone. We fill our pledge card out by ourselves. We decide what ministry to do by ourselves. But we do all this together. Thankfully, when I look out into my yard, I'll see unbuilders, often wish maybe one of you to help me get back on the journey. When you find the unbuilders in your life, and be one for those you love. Tab is going to pray for us today and with